Today's episode is brought to you by How's It Brewing. Located less than 1 mile from the surf in Honolulu, Hawaii, How's It was founded by true craft beer enthusiasts inspired by island flavors and palates. Melding that with the best of the Pacific Northwest and global styles and traditions, How's It Brewing specializes in high-quality, on-site brewed beers available for both wholesale and retail. So whether you're a bar owner, a serious beer lover, or just hop curious, they've got something for you. Stop by their tasting room and enjoy a wide range of carefully crafted beers, pre-packaged options for the non-beer drinkers in your crew, and a rotating lineup of local food trucks that'll keep your taste buds just as happy as your pint glass. The game's probably on one of their TVs, and you may even run into a local shaper to talk about that new board you've been wanting. That's How's It Brewing, 330 Kamani Street, Honolulu. Good vibes, great beer, and always something new on tap. Tell them Billy Jack sent you. Hello and welcome back to the Surfer's Library, proudly presented by Hillsborough Surf Club. I'm Billy Jack, your guide through the pages of surf history, culture, and legends. Today we continue reading Transcendental Memories of a Surf Rebel by Michael Lear Hinson and Donna Clausen-Jost. If you'd like to read the book for yourself, it's available on Amazon and EndlessStreamsPublishing.com. Last episode, we read chapters 13 through 16. Mike just barely got out of getting drafted into Vietnam and goes on to describe the promotional tour that he went on with Bruce to support the Endless Summer movie and Hobie surfboards. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and check that out. This episode, we pick up in chapter 17. Michael's back at Wind and Sea and about to meet somebody very important. Chapter 17. 3 mermaids all in a row. It was a hot July evening at Wind and Sea. Surf was 2 foot, high tide, shore break, not much action. I rolled down Nautilus and the stairs, past the famous shack the La Jolla Plank Boys built out of eucalyptus and palm fronds in 1946. The same rule applied to every generation of surfers at Wind and Sea, locals only. I came cruising down to watch the sunset, sit back and take it all in. Salty air, warm sun, the invisible carvings in the sandstone hills that only can be seen during the winter when the sand gets washed away. I was stoked just to be outside breathing fresh air after being hunched over a surfboard all day. That's the beauty of living at the beach. Have a hard day at work? The ocean will snap you out of it real quick. The seagulls crisscrossed against the setting sun. I took one more deep breath to clear the fiberglass out of my lungs. Just then I flashed on 3 people sitting under the shack. Looking closer, they definitely weren't local. I would have remembered the most incredible South American bathing suits I'd ever seen outside of the Surfer magazine. Sitting together watching the ocean were the most unbelievable girls. In the glare of the sun, I thought they were mermaids. I stayed down the beach trying not to stare, but I couldn't help it. There probably wasn't a guy on this planet that could have ignored these girls. My eyes were going to drift over to the shack whether I wanted them to or not, so I grabbed my board and paddled out before I made a complete fool out of myself. I was the only one in the water and determined to get their attention. I turned on the action and did my Phil Edwards tuck and bob, groove and slide. A good surf back in 1964 meant never getting your hair wet and knee paddling to keep your trunks dry. If it was necessary, only if you had to, then do it with style by dipping your head in the breaking part of the wave. Watching them from outside only made it worse. I had to get a closer look. I wasn't really the kind of guy who could just walk up to a beautiful woman, not to mention 3 beautiful women, and introduce myself. I had to take my time. But what if I waited too long and they left? I'm sure they were swarmed wherever they went. I might never get this kind of chance again, alone on the beach with 3 mermaids. I rode a few more sets, ducked my hair in the water, and combed it back while I drifted up to shore. I was going in. I walked up towards the shack, ready to lay on my charm. Sure, their bathing suits were driving me nuts, but how beautiful could they be? I've seen a lot of pretty girls in my life, and they all ended up being the same, just girls. The closer I got, the better they looked, the more I chickened out, and the faster I walked. I swear, all I saw as I passed by the shack was a quick glance of 2 gorgeous blondes and 1 radiant brunette. Feeling a lump in my throat the size of a ball of surf wax, I barely got out the word, "Hi," before I headed over to the stairs and up to the parking lot. That was it? What a moron. No, "Hey, baby," or "Can I give you lovely ladies a surfing lesson?" That was my best shot. High? Oh well. If I left him with anything to remember me by, I just gave him the little cameo of what surfing was all about. That night, Diff and his roommate Billy Graham were having a party. The house was already packed to the gills by the time I showed up. Danny Mac Fowley was the guy who introduced me to Diff and the Wind and Sea crew when the commercial side of surfing was just coming into its own. Danny was 10 years older and took a liking to me. I guess he saw himself in me because we became good friends. I worked my way through Diff's jammed living room and into the kitchen to get a beer from the fridge. Free beer never lasted long at Wind and Sea parties. You had to take what you could get so you didn't have to wait around empty-handed until the next beer run. Opening up the fridge, I heard a female voice over the music. "Isn't that the guy with the beautiful back who was surfing this evening?" I looked over, and standing between the stove and the kitchen sink, all decked out in their New York high fashion, were the three beauties from Wind and Sea. Talk about getting caught with your mouth hanging open. I'm sure I had the same expression on my face that I did earlier down on the beach. I froze. I quickly grabbed a beer, slammed the refrigerator door shut, and skimmed around the corner into the living room. I couldn't believe my luck. Twice in one day. What are the odds of that happening? For some reason, I was getting another chance to show these beauties my moves. So now what? I needed a minute to think this one through. Who was I fooling? I could barely get one word out of my mouth, for God's sake. The blood was rushing through my head. I had to come up with something cooler than hi. I choked on my beer and ran into Diff and Billy at the hi-fi. Who are those girls? Diff filled me in. Melinda, the tall one, is from Arizona. Her father's a state senator, and she's been hanging out at Wind and Sea every summer for years. Billy jumped in. The two blondes are friends of hers. Betty Keith's also from Arizona, and Christine Howard is half French. Her father's a famous writer or something. I only saw Mike from behind, recalls Melinda. He had a beautiful back and body. It's funny, I'd been visiting my grandmother's house in La Jolla every summer since I was 4 years old, but I didn't recognize him at all. Supposedly, the whole gang had known Melinda since she was 14 or 15 years old. She and Diff even used to date. He never knew how much younger she was than him until he asked her to drive his car and she didn't have her license yet. She looked very mature for her age. How come I never noticed her? Over the next few hours, I wormed my way closer to the girls' inner circle to pick up any information I could. I was obsessed. All I knew was that they were Eileen Ford models from New York. My life was in New York, says Melinda. I modeled and hung out with Warhol, the Kennedys, and Oleg Cassini. Every week we'd meet for Marty Sill's patio parties in Manhattan. Marty was the tailor to the elite. From there we'd go to Le Club or Harlem to dance. I was even invited to the welcome dinner for the Beatles when they played Shea Stadium. I guess you could say I lived a life in the fast lane. That's why they call it the jet set. But coming back to La Jolla every summer was a nice diversion. The blondes were beauties, but I had my eye on Melinda. She was thin, around 5 feet 10 inches, with long brown curls down to her waist. Just breathtaking. It didn't bother me that I was 2 inches shorter. The last girl I was this stoked on was my high school sweetheart, Jody Cunningham. What a doll. Jody wore her long, thick black hair in a ponytail with colored ribbons. She was an angel. She was also an A student, junior class president, and cheerleader for the Mission Bay Buccaneers football team. Jody was so sexy in her cheerleader outfit, and she had this calm disposition about her. I never felt jealous when all the jocks tried to get her attention. We were inseparable. Melinda was on a completely different level than Jody. She was glamorous and worldly. All three girls were unbelievable. Once we started talking, we didn't stop. Melinda, Christine, and Betty handled everything my friends threw their way and ended up taking over the entire party. Boy, was Melinda ballsy. At the end of the night, I offered my services, the usual tourist guide routine, servant, slave, protector, friend, and I set a date to show them the sights of Southern California. The following week was fast, man, fast and crazy. Just like beach blanket bingo, we danced the nights away. I drove them anywhere they wanted to go, up and down the coast in their car, hitting as many parties as we could, starting with the Wind and Sea party. Wind and Sea parties stretched all the way from Palomar Street down to Westbourne and were a guaranteed blast. You never knew what was going to happen. Once, when 20 bikers rumbled onto Bon Air Street and pulled into the parking lot, Kenny Easton couldn't handle them staring at us from the cliff. So he ran up the stairs, walked up to the biggest bike he could find, and took a huge chunk out of the motorcycle seat with his teeth. Kenny was feeling pretty cocky with his mouth full of stuffing and started punching anyone who came within striking distance. It was a huge brawl, surfers versus bikers. You could be sure the police were waiting close by to bust us wide open. There was always a chance that something crazy would happen at parties in La Jolla or PB. In all the years Skip and I cruised around in his black Ford, we only got into a couple of sticky situations. The worst was when a gang of East County Mexicans surrounded Skip's car and started hassling us for no reason. Skip wasn't the kind of guy that caused trouble. In fact, I've seen him talk his way out of many sketchy situations and completely avoid throwing any punches. He tried hard to convince those morons that whatever we did was just a mistake. We all tried. But before we knew it was coming, they came plowing in through the front windows and blindsided both Skip and our friend Tony. When they started coming after me, I dropped down behind the back seat and Skip floored the gas pedal. Every party we hit that summer, we gave everyone a spin for their money. 3 gorgeous models, 1 dude totally equipped with all the hip tricks and remeds of recovery, from exotic Jamaican homegrown to the latest pills and snappers that would weaken the knees of an elephant. The girls even tried morning glory seeds thinking they'd get high. Instead, all they did was throw up. We were downright dangerous, a force to be reckoned with. God, did we have fun. If there wasn't a party anywhere around, I was a pro at turning a boring night into a full-on blockbuster celebration into the sunrise. This became our MO. In the morning, we'd clean up the mess, put those to sleep that couldn't function anymore, give the rest rides home, and drive back to La Jolla. We even cruised up to LA once and ran into Warren Beatty at a corner table in the Sunshine Juice Bar. Betty and Melinda both dated Warren in New York, but Betty was all pissed off at him about something that night. She walked over and slapped him hard in the face. Warren just sat there red-faced and laughed. It was pretty obvious that wasn't the first time he got slapped by a beautiful woman. These girls were one hell of a roller coaster ride. Michael was really fun and genuinely nice, remembers Melinda. He took us anywhere we wanted to go. A month later, the girls and I rented an apartment in Playa del Norte in La Jolla. He was at our place daily. We'd party all night, and in the morning, Michael would be crashed out on our living room floor. One day, our landlady knocked on our door and asked if we were involved with the Profumo scandal, the one in England with the prostitutes that brought down the British Parliament. We just laughed. The 4 of us knew our relationship was purely platonic. I don't think I woke up the entire summer. I still have my pad over in Point Loma with Chuck, but I spent every night with the girls. Unfortunately, I was more like a brother. One day, near the end of summer, Christine told me, "You know, Michael, Melinda likes you." I thought it was obvious to everyone that I loved her, especially Melinda, but it wasn't like anything ever happened between us. For some reason, I couldn't get up the nerve to tell her. "I like her too," I said. "Then maybe you two should go out sometime," Christine added. God knows I wanted to. One of my regular stops up the coast was Joey Cabell's. Joey and Buzzy Bent were partners in the Chart House in Aspen. Joey the Fox was the ultimate playboy. We'd been friends since Wind and Sea Club, so I was always welcome, especially if I brought girls along. As soon as we walked through Joey's doors, I swear those women swooped down and ruffled every man they walked by. Christine with her French accent, Betty the wholesome girl next door, and Melinda, she didn't miss a beat. She had a dangerous combination of wit, humor, and beauty. They had those guys so confused they didn't know what hit them. At the end of the night, we'd reunite, split, and watch the trail of broken hearts they'd left behind. I mean, these guys would be drooling. Buzzy and Joey became part of our group and suggested we go skydiving. I couldn't wait to try it. I remember jumping off the diving board in Waikiki. What a rush. Bailing out of the plane back then, you jumped from the wing, and the only training you got was to leap off the top of a ladder. The instructors just wanted to make sure you landed with your knees bent. We all got the nerve to jump that day. Joey, Buzzy, the girls, and Bruce Baxter, a friend of theirs from New York. Bruce came from Texas Oil, just a great guy. He was very short, flamboyant, and wore a tuxedo every night back home. He was famous for his after-hour get-togethers that included an endless supply of champagne and every other kind of substance imaginable. As soon as my chute opened, there was complete silence. It wasn't anything like the diving board or the amusement park rides where you free fall from a tower. I had absolutely no sense of falling. I just floated above Lake Paris for what seemed like a half an hour and got a bird's eye view of the entire county of Riverside. My only problem was hitting the target. I landed so far off that one of the employees had to bring me back in a truck. Everyone else made it down safely that day, and Melinda won the prize for landing closest to the target, even though she hobbled away on a sprained ankle. Everyone knew Bruce Baxter had a huge crush on Christine. I mean, what guy wouldn't be attracted to her? She was blonde, beautiful, and French. Christine didn't like him like that, but she was always really sweet to Bruce. She was used to him following her around like a little puppy. So it was no big deal when he bought her a jump as a gift for her 20th birthday. Melinda and I weren't there, but we heard when Christine hopped off the wing it was routine. Nothing out of the ordinary happened as she floated above the ground at 120 miles an hour. Freefall is the closest thing to human flight as you'll ever get. You can go fast, slow, do somersaults, backflips, hell, you can even surf. The constant airflow allows you to do things you can't imagine. Unfortunately, when Christine pulled the ripcord, there was nothing. Everybody waited for her parachute to open. Bruce felt totally helpless as the woman of his dreams fell to the ground. Plummeting faster and faster, there was a glimmer of hope when her reserve chute opened. Everyone gave a sigh of relief and started to cheer. It just wasn't meant to be, however. Instead of filling with air, it streamed lifelessly behind her, and our beautiful friend died on impact. Chapter 18. Like a Bird. Things just weren't the same after Christine's death. We were all completely devastated. In my entire life, I would never have a better summer than I did with those three amazing women. Besides the fact that they were up for anything, I felt like the man just hanging out with them. They definitely gave my ego a big boost. But summer was over and we were all going our own way. Worst of all, I still hadn't gotten up the nerve to ask Melinda out. Believe me, I thought about it constantly. You don't even know how badly I wanted to take her out on a date, but I didn't have a car. All summer long, I drove the girls around in Betty's car, and now she was heading back to Phoenix. I don't know why Christine even bothered telling me that Melinda liked me. She never gave me any sign. She always acted like we were just friends. Christine must have heard her wrong. Melinda dated older men, Warren Beatty, George Hamilton, Ben Baldwin from the Avon family. She never went out with anyone her own age. Even if I did have a chance, it was too late now. I blew it. Joey invited Melinda up to Aspen. There was no way in hell I was going to follow them to Colorado. First off, I've never been a cold weather adventurer. When my friends headed for the mountains for 2 months of skiing every year, I'd go to Hawaii. By the time they came to their senses and got back to what was important, I'd have everything lined up in the islands. Cars, houses, you name it, I found it. The only time I did go skiing, Diff, Mickey Dora, and a few other guys from the beach loaded me into a car and kidnapped me up into the mountains to meet Joey and Buzzy. I should have known something was going on as soon as we got there. I was usually suspicious about anything they suggested, but somehow they convinced me to hop on the lift up to the bunny slope. When the first stop went by, I had a terrible feeling. I figured out there was a chair ride for each stop and we were going to the top. The higher we went, the smaller the landing was to get off. I was terrified. "Jump," someone shouted. My moment of reality came and we pushed off the lift. I don't really know how it happened, but somehow my skis got all crossed up, and when I hit the snow, on my face I went, only to be dragged out of the way of the oncoming chairs. Covered with snow from head to toe, I managed to maneuver the narrow, steep trail through the trees to the slope with my newly learned snowplow technique, grabbing for anything I could find to slow me down. I couldn't believe it when I finally reached the clearing. Just to give you an idea of how long it took me to get from the chair to the clearing, Buzzy and Joey came ripping through the trail twice, banking off one side to the other. When I finally got enough nerve to make my descent, my plan was to crisscross back and forth before those assholes came skiing past me a third time. But I built up so much speed crossing the first pass I fell backwards, dragging my arms to slow down. Then one of my skis detached and ended up in the trees. I was a mess. Snow was all up in my pant legs. I found out the hard way that a pair of Levi's and a loose sweater were not proper ski attire. The ski poles did come in handy on my struggle to the bottom, but it was a complete nightmare. It took 5 hours in the ski patrol to bring me to safety. That night, I played off my miserable day by convincing everybody how fun it was learning to ski and how I wanted to bust the mountain again. The next morning, my friends lent me ski clothes and gear. I took my time getting ready and dragged just enough to let everyone go off skiing without me. After all, it was a beautiful day and the conditions were perfect. Once my friends were up the hill, I packed snow all over myself so I looked like I just came off the summit and headed for the bar. I spent the morning drinking hot toddies and used up all the stories I'd heard from my friends over the years, dropping a few names here and there. I was carried out later that afternoon by Diff, and I spent the next day in bed with a hangover that could have killed a horse. Needless to say, that was the first and last time I ever went snow skiing. It was obvious to me now that Joey the Fox was closing in on Melinda. I couldn't really blame her if she went for it. He had a lot more going on than I did. Looks, charm, partners in the chart house. Joey offered me a job in Aspen, says Melinda. His restaurant was located at the bottom of the ski run, Little Nell, and one day he walked into the ski rental shop next door. He asked them to create this new position of ski hostess and said he knew the perfect person for the job. Since my only compensation would be a free season ski pass, they hired me. At the time, I knew nothing about skiing, but I was supposedly an expert at fitting skis and boots. All I can say is Melinda broke my heart when she took Joey up on his offer, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. Not one damn thing. So I did what any good friend would do. I sent her off to Aspen, and like a bird I flew southwest to the islands. Only time would tell. Chapter 19. Howleys. Moving to the North Shore was the only way I could get my mind off Melinda. If I couldn't have her in San Diego, Hawaii was the only place I wanted to be. Growing up a Navy brat, I hated moving back and forth from San Diego to the islands every 2 years. It was the only thing you could count on if you were raised in a military family. That didn't make it any easier to leave my friends. It was just something you had to put up with. I was 13 when Dad got transferred back to Oahu the last time. One advantage of being older was that any time I wanted, I could explore the valley behind Schofield where the river separated the naval base from the locals. I knew that crossing the riverbed into enemy territory was not a good idea. Trust me, my mother pounded it into my head every single day. Her warnings came in loud and clear. Everybody at Schofield knew what happens to haole boys who live in Hawaii. They get picked on and bullied and harassed regularly. It's not an easy road for kids growing up in the islands. That didn't stop my friends and I from sneaking down behind Schofield on the weekends and spying on the locals from our hidden spot. Forbidding me from checking it out made it that much more tempting. Every kid knows a good guava fight can give you a high for days. Creeping into enemy territory early one morning, we hiked across the riverbed and up the long trail like we were on a Navy SEAL operation, stopping only to listen for wild boars. We knew boars didn't actually come out in broad daylight. You had to be bleeding before they attacked and had you for dinner. Still, every crackle in the bush, we thought one of those suckers was going to come charging out at us. When we reached the top of the hill, there was a clearing with large 2-story houses and big yards with chickens, pigs, and dogs and cats. It was peaceful and didn't look forbidden. I was actually kind of amazed to be standing in the middle of someone's backyard without getting hassled. This wasn't so bad. It was the neighborhood dogs that blew our cover. 3 or 4 pit bulls came running out of different houses along the street. They were probably trained since birth to attack. Hawaiians were known for having the fastest dogs around to help them hunt wild boar. Another 2 or 3 raced towards us, all of them snarling and showing their teeth. My friends and I looked at each other, confused that we would create such a ruckus just by crossing the riverbed. Scrambling in different directions, I made a beeline for the bushes, ducking and bobbing through trees and cars. Again, my comic book heroes taught me exactly how to dodge enemy fire in a combat situation. Somewhere in the middle of the chaos, I realized I'd lost my friends, or maybe they'd lost me. I was scared as hell and had no idea where I was going. I ran through 2 backyards, climbed up a large mango tree fully loaded with ripe fruit, and in no time at all, I was surrounded by what looked like every pig-hunting dog on the island. I love mangoes, so this situation wasn't as bad as it could have been. Yet. There was no getting out of this one. The dogs were barking so loud, entire families started coming out of their houses and over to the mango tree just to have a good laugh. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and I was definitely the attraction of the day. "What the hell you doing here, Howley?" an older kid yelled up at me. "I know nothing, brah," I said in pidgin English, hoping they would see me as one of the guys. "Those fucking dogs chased me up here." I was so scared I didn't move a muscle, and no way did I make eye contact. One thing you learn about very quickly living in the islands is the stink eye. Hawaiians hate the stink eye. That's when 2 people make eye contact and you see this look of misunderstanding. If the other person yells out, "Hey, you think I'm stupid, you fucking Howley?" That's when you know you've crossed the line. It's the most terrifying position to be in, and it happens all the time. "Aren't you one of the punks from the Navy base?" Someone recognized me. My cover was blown. God, things felt hopeless. Most of the grown-ups got bored and went back into their homes, which basically left me in the hands of every local boy under the age of 16 who had a gripe against howlies. I had two choices. I could either sit up in that mango tree and stuff myself to death, which might take a few weeks, or I could be a man and accept my fate, that I was probably going to be the new hood ornament on some moke's rusted old beater car. I decided to stand tall and make my father proud. I climbed down from my fortress, and the second I hit the ground, my legs were so numb from sitting up in the tree, I started to collapse in a heap. Two kids grabbed me before I did a faceplant in the dirt. I guess they thought I was going to bolt. At that point, I couldn't have run away from a dead dog. "How'd you get over here?" they started in on me. "You got friends in the bushes? You think you're something special, don't you?" I tried to answer, but every time I did, someone bigger and louder got in my face. I was doomed. After all the blood rushed back into my legs, I'll admit, escaping did cross my mind for maybe a half second. But before I could get the huevos to do anything about it, the locals tied my hands and feet with a piece of rope and dragged me around from yard to yard. I wasn't sure if they were just showing off their conquest or trying to decide what to do with the howlie, but now I definitely know how a Kahlua pig feels on a spit. Everyone standing around, smiling and licking their lips. This was not good. I got even more nervous when we started down the trail toward the riverbed. Was my worst fear actually going to happen? Would I be eaten alive by a wild boar? As soon as we reached the big tree next to the creek, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. All I could picture was me on a platter in front of a family of boars. I definitely didn't expect what happened next. I swear, they all came at me at the same time and started ripping the clothes right off my body. I'd only seen that happen in cartoons. I didn't know it was possible in real life. To finish me off, they stood me straight up, strapped me to that big old tree, and left me there to die. That night, after the sun had set, my friends came back to rescue me and found me eaten alive by mosquitoes. Chapter 20. Mead Hall. My new home on the North Shore was a Quonset hut at Pupukea. Bunking with Pat Curran, Diff, and Butch Van Artsdalen, we surfed just across the bay at Diff's Dumpers, Pat's Pumpers, and Hinson's Humpers, coming in from or on the paddle out to sunset. Out the front door and to the right, you look straight into the right tube at sunset. Just a paddle over and you're in the lineup. It was really special when a swell was just beginning. Sometimes we were the only ones out. I loved to go to the point and catch those 6 to 8 foot waves. As the swell grew, you could ride a wave that got bigger as you rode towards the channel. That only lasted a while, but as it increased, you found yourself paddling further outside until it got so big that you had to come in and start thinking of another place to surf. Danny Mack, Pat Curran, and Diff were considered the pioneers of big wave riding on the North Shore. They were in there with Peter Cole, George Downing, Buzzy Trent, Al Nelson, David Cheney, and the Hawaiians, Kimo Hollinger, Buzzy Trent, Jose Angel, and a half a dozen other names I can't remember anymore. Danny was known up and down the California coast as the supreme abalone diver. He was a genius at baiting lobster traps and pulling in full loads while the rest of the fishermen tried to catch their quota by throwing traps next to his dummy buoys. Danny was also one of the first balsa surfboard shapers in Southern California. He shaped Pat Curran's first board in a garage just up from Windansea. Curran and his buddies were among the first surfers to ride Waimea in 1957. Every single one of them wiped out that day, not because they weren't experienced enough, but because their boards weren't built for 20 to 35 foot waves. That's when Curran went home to La Jolla and learned to make big wave guns for the winter swells at Waimea and Makaha. Diff was mentored by Curran and was probably the first shaper to understand the importance of rocker in a surfboard. To date, both Curran and Diff's work cannot be compared. Balsa and redwood combination nose and tail blocks. I'll never forget my first wave at sunset back in 1960. I studied it, looked over the surf for a while, and watched everyone out there. When I was convinced I could handle it, I paddled out along the channel and waited until I tried to catch a shoulder of a 10 to 12 foot peak outside. As I felt the board being pulled into the wave, I stood up real quick and instantly felt the offshore winds get under my board and blow me back over the falls. This wave was larger than life. Nothing like the California surf I was used to. In slow-mo, what probably took seconds felt like an hour of weightlessness until I was shoved smack dab into the impact area. The wave crashed on top of me and I was washed, turned and churned, and spun around like I was in the middle of the rinse cycle of my mother's Maytag. I caught my breath, surveyed the set that broke over my head, crawled up to my board on shore, and collapsed from exhaustion. I was so scared and panicked that I wouldn't be able to conquer sunset that I hid under a bush on the beach for the next hour and cried. Could I really do this? Was big wave riding in the cards for me? If you know me at all, you know that I don't really back down from a challenge. You also know I don't take failure well. From my hiding place, I watched guys with less experience catch waves and complete their rides, and I didn't like being shown up. I thought, I'm better than they are. I knew I had to give it another shot, so I paddled back out and finally rode a 12-foot face like it was a mere 4 feet. At last, I felt part of it all and was immediately turned on. The next night, Diff took me aside and let me in on an old North Shore secret. When you think you've caught a wave, paddle 2 more times, then stand up. Weeks later, I was out at Waimea on my new board catching 15-foot waves on the inside reef. Diff, Chemo, Jose, Buzzy, and Curran were all on the outside, surfing 25-footers and ragging me about not coming out. For Curran, it was more about catching the biggest wave of the year. He was so patient he could wait for hours for the perfect wave. I'd have to sit under that bush for a month before I could get it up to ride a 25-foot wave. It was Diff's advice, though, that stopped me from leaving Hawaii altogether. After I got my confidence back and used the right board, sunset became a joy to ride. Up to 20 feet outside reef break, every surfer has to encounter the North Shore, coral reef and all, if he or she wants to become a master of the sport. The North Shore of Oahu is the training ground that makes or breaks a surfer. I don't know why, but we named the Quonset hut Mead Hall. The half-moon-shaped tin can was divided into a kitchen, a bathroom, a couple of small bedrooms, and a big space for the living room. Furniture-wise, we had surf racks, 3 couches, coffee tables to leave our crap on, play games, and rest our feet, and 1 long table with benches for eating and gambling. Curran always had a lot going for him. He was as sharp as they come, but really quiet. In fact, the only time Pat talked much was when he got drunk, and then he was actually pretty funny. You just wouldn't see that side until he had a few beers in him. The best was when he'd slap on his Viking helmet and hold court over the dinner table. There was only one rule in the Quonset hut. Wherever you fell asleep was yours until you moved. That meant if you got up to go to the bathroom, your warm bed would most likely be taken unless you were bigger than the person trying to take your space. That never happened to me. I was never bigger than anyone, so I learned a few tricks that would last me through the night. Just one of the many survival strategies living with a half dozen dysfunctional, beer-drinking so-called friends that you couldn't stand after a week. Basically, we were just a bunch of scavenger surf bums, eating, breathing, and sleeping surfing. Pat and Diff were always talking about world events and politics, and Butch was the clean freak of the crew. I had my father's naval commissary card, which gave me a lot of leverage if it ever came down to kicking someone out. I could go on base and buy food, gas, whatever at a quarter of the cost of the local stores. Because of that, I figured I didn't have to volunteer for kitchen duty, which pissed Butch off to no end. Chasing me around the Quonset hut with a broom, he never did realize the worth of that little card. I'll admit, I've always been a wise ass. I'm able to get myself and a lot of other people in trouble just by being an asshole. As a result, Butch and I definitely had a love-hate situation going on. I can't tell you how many times we'd get drunk down at Maynard's and end up arguing. It could be anywhere. Vacant lots, parties, wherever we were, we'd go at it. Then, by the end of the night, we'd walk out together and everything would be okay. We really were good friends. When Butch was sober, he'd kill for me, and if anybody bothered me, well, forget it. Butch was death on wheels to that person. He was just that kind of guy. Surfing came before anything, including work. Ask anyone in the hut, money was always an issue. If we were broke, we'd scrounge up free food wherever we could. Fish from the ocean, fruit trees, the pineapple fields surrounding Schofield. We totally ignored the trespassing signs and the $50 fine and scarfed those juicy pineapples down until our stomachs exploded. Another chance for free food came up 6 weeks each year when the military practiced war games in the hills above Sunset. Harry Bloomfield, Paul Gebauer, Buddy Boy, and I would sneak around after midnight in Harry's Jeep with the headlights off. Bombs exploded, machine guns fired one particular night as we drove around a bend in the middle of nowhere and right into an ambush. We were so scared Harry hightailed it out of there and didn't stop until we bumped into a unit of 200 or so hiking soldiers. We pulled in at the back of the line, thinking it would be safe. I mean, come on, it was dark. Nobody's going to question a Jeep tagging along. We probably would have made it out of there too if it hadn't been for two soldiers with machine guns who wanted to hitch a ride. The minute they saw our civvies, it was all over. I swear, the troops played it up like it was real. We were ordered out of the Jeep at gunpoint, pushed around, and split up for interrogation. After an hour, I was over their good cop, bad cop routine, shining a light in my eyes and threatening me with a pistol. We finally convinced them we were just messing around. I think they were embarrassed that a few surfers could infiltrate their war games because they released us and didn't press charges, and we were dumped off at our Jeep just as the sun came up behind Pupukea. After the games were over, we picked up all the rations the soldiers left behind. I swear it was like going to the grocery store. Cereal, eggs and bacon, powdered milk, sugar, crackers, peanut butter and jelly. They looked just like TV dinners. You didn't even need a stove. All you had to do was mix water with the meal packet and it heated up all by itself. We had military rations for months. Chapter 21. Backyard Shapers. In the 60s, shapers on the North Shore were like cockroaches. If you spotted one, there were probably 1,000 more hiding under the rug. All over the island, makeshift shaping stalls were rigged up on the sides of houses or crammed under lean-tos surrounded by banana trees. That's where I spent most of my time when I wasn't surfing, out next to the Quonset hut. I'd been working steadily as an independent shaper at shops up and down the California coast ever since my first job senior year in high school with Gordon and Smith. Back then, I earned a whopping $10 for piecework until Floyd moved to Australia. I swear, even before he boarded the plane, Larry hung a time clock in the shop and told everyone it was hourly wages from then on. Larry was really intelligent and a fine businessman, but struggling with him was a tight situation. I was ready to move on anyway to up my price. Surfboard shaping is a very competitive business, and Hobie was always the forerunner. Larry knew it and always kept close tabs on his competitors. I guess you could say that Hobie has helped me more in life than life itself, because every time I needed a job, he hired me on the spot and paid me more than the standing offer. I moved around a lot back then, and the same thing happened when I'd go back to Larry. He'd hire me right back, only for different reasons than Hobie. Larry just wanted the inside scoop. Shaping underground at different shops was a fairly new concept at the time. Hobie, Jack Haley, Dewey Weber, Jack O'Neill, Gordon and Smith. I started driving up and down the coast, gaining entry into everyone's camp. This afforded me more money and a glimpse of the latest ideas. Besides nosing around other shops, a lot of research and development went into each board I designed. Before Howley's, the only surfers who could ride the tube at Pipeline were a small group of Hawaiians. Then Butch got out there on one of the memorial boards I shaped for him, the Red Devil. It was something else. 9-foot, 21-inch, 2-inch thick square tail. He rode it to glory at Pipeline in 10-foot surf, and you felt like he'd been riding it his whole life. Butch was the man that day until the board broke in half. Then he wasn't. Another idea I got was when I started to lay into turns on the rail of the board instead of the common pivot turn from the tail. I could lay into a full rail from nose to tail. Through research and design of the board and the effects of fins, it became more of a tool to be used to reach certain maneuvers one would want to achieve. It wasn't just something to float on and catch a wave. If you look closely, most boards pivot around just like boats. But this was all about the rails and fins, and a common thickness of size and curves in order to produce a board that turned on its rail, a maneuver Barry Kaniapuni did first. My idea turned out to be one of the thinnest boards around. Since I only weighed about 130 pounds, it floated me just fine in the extra thick Hawaiian saltwater. I was just finishing up my blade of a dream board when Dick Brewer showed up for the first time at the Quonset hut asking for Pat Curran. Nobody had heard of Brewer back then. He was just some pipsqueak engineering student who shaped his first board and decided to move to Oahu. I guess he wanted to find out as much as he could about shaping from the masters, and word on the beach was that Curran was the kahuna. After a few games of Monopoly, Brewer started hanging around the house on a regular basis, I guess to pick Pat's brain. No big deal. Diff and Curran liked him. Besides, whenever the weather turned Kona with weeks of blown-out conditions and rain, it was always good to have a strong Monopoly opponent. You were pretty much stuck in the house, and you know what that led to. Everyone went stir-crazy. Well, thank you once again for joining us. I hope you liked that story. Until next time, Keep your toes on the nose, your bottom turns tight, and your stoke high. I'll see you in the lineup.